The thing about AI is it's not just a US problem. It is, or opportunity. You can't say it's all bad. But we are very honored to have an expert here that has been following all the international updates and happenings in the world. And for another speed round presentation, and, okay. Hey, professors in the back. No worries, professor. That's what we do. We talk all day. George York from the RIAA is going to take us around the world in terms of an international presentation. He is yet another repeat appearance after last year. Thank you for coming back. I'm sure lots happened in the last year. And if you could bring us up to date on the international world of AI, we'd really appreciate it. Thanks, George.
I think I'm all set. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much to Linda. Thank you so much to Chris. Thank you so much to AU and its wonderful parking facility. Thank you so much to Kogod. Thank you so much to all of you for being here today. Really, really excited to be back. I'm so grateful to be asked to be back, especially with such a great, tremendous group of folks and friends and tremendous colleagues. So I'm eager to dive right in and maybe just 2 quick sort of framing comments first. You guys have spent a lot of time this morning on all the important issues on licensing, on human-centric AI, on litigation. You know, these are really some of the key issues that are driving what's going on in our world. So I'm going to very briefly touch on some international issues, but there are so many of those as well. So what I'm going to try to do is adjust the facts presentation on text and data mining exceptions. You know, there's obviously so much else going on in the world on transparency, on trade secrets, on copyrightability, so many other issues. I'm going to focus kind of specifically on a key issue that affects all of us is, you know, the extent to whether or not countries are adopting exceptions to copyright to permit the use without authorization of copyright protected content in the training of AI models. And so we have a tremendous amount of legislation just in that area alone. And so we're going to walk through it a little bit and would love to hear any questions as we go along or at the end, whatever works out best. And if anyone's watching the clock, just feel free to give me the hook when it's over. So here's where we stand today. And if you were here last year, this might look familiar. We have those 4 countries who currently have on the books legislation that addresses copyright exceptions for the training of AI models without authorization. The European Union has such an exception in its law. Japan, it was the first mover in this area back in 2019. This was well before the advent of generative AI. So this happened under a research rubric. This was not something that we were particularly focused on. We were monitoring it, of course, but this was in a completely different era, and it has taken on tremendous import. It also happens to be one of the broadest text and data mining exceptions on Earth, and one of the most problematic. It provides for no distinction between categories of content, no limitations. It doesn't even require access to legitimate content. It is very broad. It was conceived, as I've explained, in a very different era. Now, Japan has been under tremendous pressure since then to limit, to control, to clarify this sweeping piece of legislation, including by its own content creators in Japan, which, as you know, is quite significant, both in terms of its domestic consumption, but also in terms of its global exports, right? Anime is a hugely popular form of creativity. I would happen to be in, where was I? Savannah the other week, and they had a giant anime conference. I thought about getting dressed up, but it didn't work out. Then we have Singapore, of course. 2021 adopts a piece of very broad legislation, nearly as broad, equally as problematic, I would say, as that in Japan for copyright exceptions for text and data mining. And finally, the United Kingdom has a more narrow exception to copyright for non-commercial use principally for research. So we have a sort of a cascading hierarchy of different laws on the books. Each one of these countries is examining each of their own laws, in addition to those under the deliberation category as well. So the UK is currently examining a broadened version of its text and data mining exceptions, where we're looking at concerning provisions around things called opt-out and other broadenings of this current non-commercial use, fairly limited exception in the UK. Singapore, now they have currently a exception to copyright. They examined an exception to technological protection measures. So not TDM, but TPMs, technological protection measures. That means the ability to circumvent firewalls, password protection, and other technical measures that prevent access to content without authorization. Fortunately, thanks in part to US government pressure, thanks in great part to creative industry pressure, Singapore ultimately rejected that very problematic proposal, which we should count as a major step forward. However, Singapore retains the law. Some are arguing, including in Singapore, that the Singaporean exception does not cover fully text and data mining as we might imagine it. So that's a possible interpretive benefit that we're seeing in Singapore. Notably, of all of these countries, and basically of many countries on Earth, Singapore also has a separate fair use standard. And I think it's important to realize that Singapore elected, now this is sort of perhaps a silver lining of a very dark cloud, elected not to insert its TDM exception under a fair use theory. It had to create a separate theory. So at least in terms of international interpretation of the scope of fair use, Singapore, for at least, has determined that fair use does not cover text and data mining. Japan has also issued guidance on the scope of its protection. It's non-binding guidance. Fortunately, it's not very sufficient, but nonetheless, we are trying to push on that door. Finally, the EU has issued not only its the copyright directive for the DSM, which included a text and data mining provision, two elements to that. First, a non-commercial use provision, and second, a commercial use provision with some limitations. Subsequently, it issued the EU AI Act, which addresses things like transparency. Also, importantly, and that's a little bit outside of the scope of today's conversation. However, the EU did implement a provision which we believe is critical, which we strongly support, which is to explicitly clarify that any AI model that's trained in a jurisdiction outside of the EU, whether it's the US, Japan, Singapore, the UK, if it is then imported into the EU and it is violative of EU copyright law, then that model is violative of EU law. So compliance with the copyright of the EU AI Act means you must be compliant with the EU copyright law. That's a critical distinction. Some of our colleagues in the tech industry will say that's an extraterritorial application. That's bunk. Every country has the right to apply its laws domestically within its jurisdiction, full stop. That applies whether we're talking about copyright or any other type of good or service. So that's a little bit where we are today and where we are starting to go tomorrow. But let's turn quickly now to what's under deliberation. You see this is a long list, and this isn't probably an exclusive list. This is pretty illustrative, but you can see there's some very large markets on there, some very big countries, but also some countries who have regional importance, right? Brazil happens to be a leader, for better or for worse, in the Latin American region and also in international organizations. You see Mexico, a similar leader in the region. You see China, obviously, will be very involved in not only what it decides to do domestically, but also what's happening amongst its trading partners and certainly its regions and its proxy states. So in Brazil, we're seeing an effort. There's a law there that's moving slowly through their legislature. It's passed, I believe, the House and is currently in the Senate. I may have that backwards. That legislation is still underway. Chile has a very broad text and data mining exception with no limitation. However, due to some great work by creators in Chile, that has been significantly reduced. The hope is that that will ultimately fail because presidential elections will be occurring there later this fall, and this legislation will be sort of swept aside and kicked into the long grass. In Colombia, there's a proposal now, a very broad proposal that does not include text and data mining exceptions, but it could be added. In Mexico, this is a little detour from the legislative side of the House, but in Mexico, there was recently some jurisprudence at the Supreme Court level that purely AI-generated content is not eligible for copyrightability following the US jurisprudence, and that was a very good outcome because that was not a clear-cut case, apparently, in Mexico. Turning to Australia, we have every 2 years we get the joy of the Productivity Commission, who likes to talk about things we don't like to talk about. And at the end of the day, they have proposed once again a text and data mining exception. Our hope is that will be again put down and rejected, as it has been in previous years. But it's an ongoing challenge there. China and Hong Kong have both been rumored to be deliberating on text and data mining exceptions. We know that that is true in Hong Kong. Hong Kong has said they are planning to issue a text and data mining exception to copyright in the near term. They've been saying that for a while now. We're working very closely with them on that to make sure that it's either stopped outright or limited as much as possible. South Korea has a new government there. They are very strong on promoting an AI economy. However, it's interesting to note that South Korea has a very strong music economy. And so the music economy there is working with the government to try to prevent that outcome. And so that is a back and forth. Finally, in Vietnam, no text and data mining exception in the current proposal, but we understand that there might be one that's dropped in at the last second. And so that's something we're going to have to fight tooth and nail. So we talked through at a quick clip what we're seeing in individual countries, but the true challenge is what's happening then internationally. And so we look to international organizations, sometimes forgotten or at least not as prioritized. We saw, for example, in ASEAN, Singapore led an effort to basically say, hey, if you want to have an AI economy, you should adopt a text and data mining exception. And so that became part of the lexicon of the ASEAN, the Associations of Southeast Asian Nations. And if you have fair use, that's not a defense against copyright infringement. That's a right to text and data mining using copyright. That was a wild kind of principle that was developing in that region. The U.S. government went in, I shall say under a previous administration, and told them no, and that went away, and now the line is respect copyright. G7, the group of 7 nations, so that's Japan, that's the UK, several countries who are reviewing possible text and data mining exceptions or who have them, nonetheless have agreed over and over again to respect copyright, to provide for human-centric creation, to make sure that AI developers are aware of and are working with copyright creators or content creators to assure that their issues are being addressed. This is soft law. This isn't treaty law. This isn't binding. But every time you want to negotiate a treaty, you look at what's been agreed in the soft law context. We've had a lot of good success, including with the current administration. In a recent leader statement this summer, our president, along with the leaders of the other G7 countries, agreed to language that basically said we must respect IP in the context of AI. We'll see how that works in practice. The OECD is carrying forward G7 work in that context with respect to implementing codes of practices for AI developers with respect to informing copyright creators and trade agreements. So for one example of a trade agreement where AI has become an issue and copyright exceptions have become an issue is in Africa. As some of you may know, there's work currently on an Africa continental free trade area, and that's sort of been established. There is an IP protocol to that. At one point, there was going to be a copyright exception for text and data mining that would effectively apply to the entire continent, or at least all the African countries who were a part of it. That fortunately did not prevail, and that was removed from the text, but this is an ongoing challenge. So you can't just think of the national level. We have to be thinking at the international level all the time. The United States has previously, not under the Trump administration, but under previous administrations, tried to export a provision that carried forward some fair use language called the balance provision. Some of us may be aware of that. And that language, the Trump administration did not include that in the USMCA, the US-Canada-Mexico agreement. Fortunately, thank you. But that could reemerge. And we've seen versions of that language in a free trade agreement, which would be binding on the United States, binding on the other partners, that would apply the fair use to text and data mining. We've seen that. We saw that in earlier versions under the Obama administration. Fortunately, the Trump administration rejected it. Finally, in WIPO, the conversations around AI and copyright are raging. And this is something that we're monitoring closely. There have been calls for AI treaties involving copyright. These will surely result in exceptions rather than affirmative protections. And that's something we need to be pushing back on. So maybe I'll stop there. That was a quick tour around the world. And I would love to try to answer any questions. Amy.
Groups help their constituencies understand how to play, how to be at the table, how to make a difference with all of this.
Yeah, that's the one of the most important questions that's out there, and I think the answer is be engaged in the way that you can. In a way, I work in development sometimes, and so in a way that's meaningful to you, right? And so be in the way that you can. So there are many organizations around in DC and globally. One great one, as you may know, is called the Human Artistry Campaign. The Human Artistry Campaign is an exceptional organization that is involved in precisely these issues. Opposing text and data mining exceptions, ensuring that any AI development, deployment, and use is done in a way that is human-centric, and that is done in a way that maximizes human creativity, and that has several critical principles at a high level that guide and create a very broad tent for creators of all shapes and sizes. So that is a good example of the national level engagement. That's national level. Anne, did you have a question? Perfect. I love that. I'll wrap it up. So then, Human Artistry Campaign is a great example of being involved. And guess what? Human Artistry Campaign is also international. So if you're in Brazil, or you're in Bulgaria, or you're in Beijing, maybe, you can be a part of a version of the Human Artistry Campaign. And so that's great. So you can be local and global kind of all at the same time. We also are a part of an organization called the Digital Creators Coalition. The Digital Creators Coalition is trying to bring together a rising tide lifts all boats approach to say, hey, not everyone has the resources, the capacity, the background in international trade or international diplomacy. Let's make sure the people who do have that are sharing the wealth and making sure that we're going in and talking to the administration. So the Digital Creators Coalition has monthly meetings where we make sure everyone's aware of the top line messages, the top line issues that are going on in international, kind of like the chart we showed, and then how you can be involved. And so that's another great way for individual creators to be involved through their associations. You know, the Digital Creators Coalition, we've added some great folks from the National Association of Voice Actors, right? The National Choreographers Association, the Production Music Association. These aren't the RIAAs or MPAs of the world. These are organizations that work with folks, and the more we can make sure that people are aware and engaged and signing on to our letters and doing our meetings with the administration, it's been great. The administration calls and say, we want to meet with real creators, you know, not George the lobbyist. And they love it because they're hearing from real folks about real issues and just what the last panel said about how humans are being impacted by this. That's the most compelling narrative. That's the most authentic narrative. And that's a critical narrative that we need to have out there. So Amy, it's a great question. Anne, you had a question?
I'm not going to give an example of what happened in the UK, because they had 2 times, they had like AI legislation that was a done deal pretty much in 2 different administrations. And both times the artists stopped it by going public, reaching out to the public. They did blank album. If you saw, they released a silent album, and they did all pardon? Yeah, but they did all kinds of stuff, so I think the artists can actually reach out to the public, and the UK's has done it twice now and stopped it, and they could do the same thing if they wanted them to take a position in an international context. So
Such a great point. I think we had maybe one other question.
Thanks so much. My name is Kate Lardner. Nice to meet you, everybody. Thank you for having me. I had a question about the AI action plan, and there was no mention of of copyright and AI training in the AI action plan, but I know in the speech following it, it was brought up, and kind of what was said is that competing with others like China and Japan, we can't license everything, and kind of signaling less sympathy for rights holders than we've seen in the courts, as we've talked about, and in the Copyright Office's AI report. What do you make of that contradiction in the government and the balance between protecting creators by promoting licensing versus competing with other nations in the AI race?
Yeah, no, great question. So take heart, take a breath. Fortunately, this administration has been very clear about its views about AI and IP, AI and copyright. So if one member of the administration slipped an extra talking point into a speech, that's sort of interesting, but I think we should look at what the administration policy is, right? Maybe not a sort of a quick statement. So what this administration has said in terms of actual policy statements that are written down and agreed, that's where I like to go. So let's just do a quick sweep of those. So first, in the everyone celebrates, I think, World IP Day, right? With our family, we do usually a big cookout. Everyone does it in their own way, so that's exciting. I mean, let's make sure that continues. But what did the president say? He said that IP protection is essential to our national economic security. We are the business of America is business. Thank you, Calvin Coolidge, and that is our creators, that is our songwriters, those are our movie producers, those are our innovators and creators. That's what drives our business. That's what drives our economy, and we are renewing our conviction. And I'm reminding the new PTO director Squires that this is our new conviction, that we are protecting IP. That is critical. That's about IP generally. So what is that? What about AI and IP? The president said this summer, so that the AI, I know April 26th is seared in all of our brains. That's World IP Day. Then at the G7, in the leader statement, the president agreed with the G7 leaders, in the context of AI, we will respect IP. Full stop. No comma and but, not in these circumstances. Full stop. That's critical. What else? Here's another example. This is a little bit in the weeds. I apologize. Then I'll wrap it up. The U.S. government, in the context of the EU AI Act, submitted comments. Now, this was we can pretend you didn't hear this. Submitted comments, great comments, to the European Commission. Now, this was a démarche. This was a government-to-government communication, so nobody has seen these. Wink. And so what those said were respect copyright, and also respect trade secrets, but let's not get too mixed up in that. So it was very, very good. And it was qualified, and it was did what it needed to do, because we're in a sort of a policy deliberation moment. But in terms of how the US government will engage with foreign countries on AI and copyright, for me, the message is clear. There's been no statement in the AI action plan or in the special 301 report or anywhere else that says ignore copyright or let's throw the guys out the window and let's just do AI all the time. Nobody has said that, not even the president. And what the president has said and what the administration has said is quite the opposite. And it's good on copyright, and we just need that to continue.
What an amazing note, Chris. A little positivity to end our morning. Thank you, George. That was great. I don't know if I need it. I have a very loud voice.
You want this?
As a Thank you, George. Always amplifying voices, which is what you do so well all for us all around the world. The Digital Creators Coalition, George is being a little modest. He basically runs that organization and keeps us all on track. And it's an honor to kind of hear him do his trek around the world for all of us. Thank you so much for coming. I'm looking at Chris, if you have any final remarks to say, but these types of conversations on college campuses, and I think somebody mentioned this earlier, I think Josh mentioned it on the last panel, are so important. It really is where these thoughts can originate, and we can help educate the next generation of policymakers and lawyers and musicians and everybody who's going to be in this ecosystem moving forward. So it is a true honor for American University to be at the center of a lot of these debates here in Washington. And thank you, Chris, and your institute for.
The honor is ours. If anybody wants copies of slides, we'll post them on the Artist Rights Institute.org website. So just go, if you go there, you'll see the nav bar at the top. It'll say Roundtable. Just click there and it'll all be there. But not today, but soon.
But let's keep these
Thanks,
conversations rolling too, all year long. We'll be back next fall, but until then, please talk to each other, meet each other, and keep the debate going, because humans are a critical part of all of this. If you take nothing else away from today, is that human artistry needs to continue, and we are the ones to make that happen. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for coming. I hope you don't have a parking ticket. If you do, let me know, and we'll talk to the parking gods at AU.
You know the way to fix the parking ticket, right?
Rip it up.
Pay it.
Pay it.
You pay it.
You pay it. Hopefully nobody does. Anyhow, good luck. Have a safe day, and thanks so much for coming.